Thomas and Friends Season 8 first premiered on the 1st of August 2004 in the UK and on the 5th of September 2004 in the US. The season was produced by Simon Spencer, directed by Steve Asquith. Michael Angeles returned for the UK dub, Michael Brandon for the US dub, and the music was composed by Robert Hartshorn. After the purchase of Ghislaine, Hit Entertainment decided to make quite a few changes. Jan Page was replaced by Paul Larson and Abby Grant as story editors, and Sam Barlow was appointed as a script executive. The episode's run times were extended from the traditional 4.5 minutes to 7 minutes. As stated, Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell were replaced by Robert Hartshorn, and David Mitton was superseded by longtime Thomas and Friends crew member Steve Asquith. The 35mm film cameras were also replaced as well, with new Sony digital equipment. While there was a big revamp behind the scenes, in terms of characters, everything was stripped back. No new characters were introduced in Season 8. The only major change in terms of characters was that this was the first time that the Steam team really came into prevalence. It consisted of engines 1 to 7, with Emily being added as the 8th member of this Steam team, in order to bring some diversity to the predominantly male cast. In terms of this era of the franchise, I did not watch this as a kid. I caught the odd episode here and there on Channel 5's Milkshake, but this is when I was a teenager, and if you've watched my History with Thomas and Friends video on the channel, it was around the time when societal pressures were making me stop watch Thomas and Friends. And I have to say that this era did make it slightly easier for me to withdraw from the franchise, because there was a noticeable change in the show. The writing style was more simplistic, definitely geared more to the babies and toddlers market that were the primary audience for the show. The characters were stripped of their development and their growth from the first 7 seasons, reverting kind of back to type, but not all the way there. And there were only a few secondary characters that would pop up every now and then in episodes. So as such, I don't have nostalgia goggles when it comes to this season. I watched this as a fully grown adult and no fondness for this era of Thomas and Friends like a lot of my YouTube contemporaries do. But that's okay, because I like hearing the difference of opinions from younger Thomas and Friends creators in this fandom. It helps me see things in a different perspective than I would normally see in my old man brain. Have I warmed up to Season 8? You're going to find out, because this is my ranking video of Thomas and Friends Season 8. Once again, these are all my own personal opinions. Your ranking list will differ from mine, because it's the one thing that makes the Thomas fandom so unique. Now let me know in the comments what you think of Thomas and Friends Season 8. All I ask is that you be respectful, and above all, enjoy the video. Okay, let's dive in. Number 26, Henry and the Wishing Tree. Written by Abby Grant and Paul Larson, Henry wishes that he could pull the express at a wishing tree in the forest, but soon learns to be careful about what he wishes for. We'll start with the positives of this episode. They keep some continuity with the fact that Henry is a bit of an eco-warrior and loves the forest. Aside from that, that's really all I can think of. Episodes like this make me firmly believe that this era of Thomas and Friends is a separate timeline to the rest of the classic era seasons 1 to 7. Because if I had to count from here into canon, it just makes me more angry that they assassinate this character. Because it essentially says that Henry has never pulled the express in his life. Even though, in this season, you see him pull the express. And in the classic era, he's pulled it multiple times. And in terms of Michael Angeles' voice work for Henry in this episode, I definitely don't like it. It just sounds so generic. It's like Angeles forgot how Henry was meant to sound from the previous seasons, tried something new, but it did not land for his character. I wasn't a fan of the story, although I did like the scene with the buffet cart. Overall, not a big fan, guys. Sorry. Number 25, Thomas, Emily, and the Snowplow. Written by Abby Grant, Thomas ignores Emily's advice to put on his snowplow and as a result, ends up getting into trouble in the snow. This is where I owe the fandom an apology. I'd refer to this era of Emily as Bitch Emily. It's not a very appropriate way to describe this character, so I do apologise. I think I had a visceral reaction to her persona because when you look at her from season 7 to season 8, it is such a radical shift. Even when you just take it from this hit era into the nitrogen era of Thomas and Friends, once again, it is a radical shift. It was like they tried to give the character flaws to add to her personality, and it just came off as very brazen and not nice for general audiences. However, I have tried to keep an open mind since then about this character of Emily in this era, because a lot of people like it. A creator that I respect in the fandom, the Yellow Striker, actually did a very good video explaining why this characterization of Emily is good. I have to admit, I was swayed. It made me see this character of Emily in a different light, and accept that it wasn't just negative personality traits flung in for negative personality traits' sake. They were trying to flesh out a character who was a bit of a blank slate in season 7 and make her an integral part of the Steam team. So my apology is set. I will not refer to this character as Bitch Emily anymore. That being said, I am still not the biggest fan of this episode. The big sister qualities of Emily that are now on display here are admirable, but especially in the scene where Thomas tries to get Emily to say sorry and she just says, I am sorry, I'm sorry that you didn't listen to me. It does get my back up a bit. That's more of a manners standpoint for me. I was raised with proper manners, please and thank yous, holding doors for people, and a lack of manners, especially in a children's show where we're trying to enlighten children on the importance of manners, really does get my back up. The winter effects, not as good as when David Mitton done them. But when you add the CGI snowfall in, just because of the time that the CGI was being used, it is very noticeable and does take you out of the episode. I don't think it's as bad as I did previously, but like the cold weather in this episode, I just can't warm to it. Number 24, You Can Do It, Toby. Written by Paul Larson, Toby has to look after Wellsworth Yard while Edward is at Brentham, but is worried about pushing Gordon and the Express up his hill. I think everybody can agree that the character assassination of the older characters in this season of Thomas and Friends really annoy all of the fandom. Edward and Toby are reduced to caricatures that are nothing like their personalities at all. When you try to disconnect from the classic seasons, it still doesn't help, because you don't want to see any character like this. Stripped of confidence, not feeling like they can do anything. Yes, it does make it more triumphant in the end when they do it, but come on guys, it's Toby. We know what Toby was like in the Railway series, we know what he's like in the classic series. Why did they even think this was the way that Toby was meant to be portrayed? It's horrible. I don't like it. I will never like it. I will never understand it. I just can't fathom it. And I know that they're trying to encourage Toby, but when they do so in this episode, it feels more like they're patronising him. And once again, the voice work for Toby from Michelangelo's. Why was he told to voice Toby this way? What was wrong with the way he'd been voicing him previously? It was perfectly fine. I think I need to stop there, guys, because if I keep going, I'm probably going to get quite annoyed. Number 23, Percy and the Magic Carpet. Written by Abby Grant, Percy is disappointed about delivering a carpet until Salty tells him that it could be magic. This is where they're really starting to strip away the realism of the show. The realism was why I loved Thomas and Friends in the first place. The show made you feel like Sodor was a real place that you could go to and you could see these engines and you could get lost in this world because it was believable. This is when that believability starts to get peeled back again. And Percy now is the baby of this Steam team. And it's just amplified in this episode with the whole, this could be a magic carpet thing. Positive point. Seeing Salty's a good thing. The ending was alright. I think you can tell I'm clutching at straws here, guys. Number 22, Too Hot for Thomas. Written by Paul Larson, Thomas is dismayed when he has to get cream, strawberries and chocolate to make ice cream instead of taking the children on a hot day at the seaside. Things I relate to in this. Not liking the heat. I can understand why people would be frustrated in the heat. I live with that even when it's meant to be just a simple overcast day. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this episode isn't very good. It's really bringing to light the fact that we are just in simple childlike stories now. And not the good type of childlike stories where it lets the kids think about things and start to understand life lessons. It's, we will pander to you. This is a very simple story. Just sit and enjoy it. Something that I will give this series credit for is that they are really starting to diversify with human characters. They're taking a lot more care with the model making work of human characters. I really like that. But I have to admit, the image of a fat controller being around lots of kids and kind of seaside bathing suit things, am I the only one that thinks it's creepy, or is it just my dad brain? Number 21, Don't Tell Thomas. Written by Paul Larson, Thomas feels upset about being left out of a Christmas surprise that is being arranged. But when Harold tells him that he hasn't, he finds out the surprise is for the number one engine himself. I don't like the attitudes of the engines in this episode. When they're blatantly saying don't tell Thomas when Thomas is right there, you understand why he's starting to get a bit down and upset. But the attitudes of the engines in this episode are absolutely stinking. It's what really puts me off this season. The characters just don't feel like the characters that I know. I keep trying to put the disconnect and have it as a separate timeline, but even then, the characters just feel badly written. And the story itself, I think it's a little bit redundant. I know I say that a lot, but in this episode, I can really feel the redundancy coming on here. Number 20, Emily's Adventure. Written by Paul Larson, Emily learns to ask nicely whilst collecting timber to repair Farmer McCall's barn roof after a big storm damages it. Things I really liked about this episode, the first is the storm effects. It seems that Steve Asquith was very good with storm effects throughout his tenure as director. You look at the scene with the suspension bridge and Calling All Engines, for example. That was beautifully directed. And one thing I really liked in this episode was the Emily and Elizabeth dynamic. There was a good back and forth with them, and I would have loved to have seen that explored a bit more in future seasons of Thomas and Friends in this era. Having a character like Elizabeth who's a bit older in personality and maturity compared to Emily could have been a great guide for this character as she developed throughout the seasons. Only thing I'm not the biggest fan of about this is the moral is very ham-fisted. As I said previously, having manners is a good thing, and having this emphasis on the fact that Emily needs to learn about manners to become a better engine is a great moral. And I get that sometimes it needs to be ham-fisted just to drive the point across, but it just reminds me that the classic era is really gone. As George Carlin said, morals were massaged into the framework of the show, where kids were able to use their level of intelligence to figure out what it meant. It didn't need to be spoon-fed to them like these episodes are in this era. Number 19, Thomas Saves the Day. Written by James Mason, Thomas tries to tackle a dangerous bend without Annie and Clarabelle's assistance. Something I'm not the biggest fan of is that Thomas is solely reliant on Annie and Clarabelle now in this season. Annie and Clarabelle seem to be like a crutch for Thomas in this episode, but in later seasons, that isn't really explored. Why is he so dependent on Annie and Clarabelle for guidance and reassurance? It's like they bottle it in this episode that he needs them for reassurance. Then the episode plays out, the issue's resolved, and he never has a fault in his confidence again. To the point where Annie and Clarabelle essentially become mute. I did like the whole story around the bend and how he's lost his confidence and he's trying to build that confidence back up. And it's when push essentially comes to shove that he has to step up and prove his worth. I liked that whole chase scene. I thought it was very well executed. And I'll take any win that I can get. Number 18, Percy's Big Mistake. Written by Abby Grant, Percy is frightened he will be sent to the scrapyards after being late too often. Percy-centric episodes, I always like them. Even the ones that maybe portray him as babyish, childlike, they have Percy in a lead role rather than Thomas, I'm all for it. And it's an interesting story because they take the fact that Percy mishears something being said and totally goes the wrong way with it to the point where he is freaking out and hiding. I think I relate to it more because I do see it in my kids. Sometimes the boys will overhear my wife and I talking about something, get the completely wrong end of the stick and freak out over it, and we have to try and explain to them what's really going on and tell them that they shouldn't be eavesdropping, and if they're going to listen to something, they have to get all sides of the story because a child's mind can just run away with them. And I think that's what they were trying to do with Percy here. Well, there are other episodes with Percy in the lead role that I think are better in this season. I did enjoy this. I think this was one that I needed a repeat viewing of to appreciate everything that I said about it. Rather than when I watched it the first time and just instantly thought, Percy character baby, Percy bad. Number 17, As Good as Gordon. Written by Abby Grant, Emily gets a chance to pull the Express and tries to do as good a job as Gordon. I can't believe that this was the 200th episode of Thomas and Friends. I think the fact that it gets to 200 episodes over 8 seasons, that is amazing. I think we counted up how many episodes there are of Thomas and Friends. Actually, that's something that you guys can tell me in the comments. How many episodes of Thomas and Friends are there from seasons 1 to 24? I'm genuinely curious now. Let me know in those comments. But I like this episode because it essentially does prove the worth of Gordon. Gordon does get a lot of love in this era, and this is a way of showing him respect without him actually being front and centre for it. Because Emily thinks that she can do the job of pulling the Express as well as Gordon does, and throughout this episode, not only does she realise that it takes a lot more to be an Express engine, but it tends to humble her, ground her, and give her a bit more character development. I did find Emily's personality traits annoying the first time I watched it, but now I can see where the growth is starting to come in with this character and this iteration of Emily. And episodes like this reaffirm that for me. Number 16, Thomas Gets It Right. Written by Robin Rigby. Thomas wants to make multiple journeys, but he is disappointed when he has to deliver eggs slowly for Farmer McCall. One of the things that this series really started to experiment with was different ways of using cinematography. The tracking shots, for example, that was something that was quite unique to this season. And I know a lot of fans didn't really like it. I always really respect when they take a chance on something, even if it doesn't work. And a lot of that new camera work was on show in this episode. It certainly gives it a unique selling point. And ironically, the whole message about going slow and steady, it does make it a lot slower and not in the enjoyable pay attention type of way. I would say that this episode is the episode where there's nothing really overly positive to say, but there's nothing really overly negative either. This is the meh episode. Number 15, Thomas and the Firework Display. Written by Abby Grant and Paul Larson, Thomas is upset that James gets the task of delivering fireworks instead of him, but gets his chance when the splendid red engine breaks down. I think a lot of people agree with what stands out in this episode, and it's the Thomas and James dynamic. It's such an interesting viewing experience. Something that you didn't really see a lot of in the previous era of Thomas and Friends. And the writers probably thought this was something that they could play about with, do a little bit of experimenting, and see what they could come up with. And I gotta say, you did a good job. Yes, the episode's pretty straightforward, but it's straightforward in a good way. It had everything you want from an episode of Thomas and Friends. For an introductory episode into this soft reboot, it hit every point that it was needed to. And the ending where they're watching the fireworks is pretty cool. Number 14, Fish. Written by Paul Larson, Thomas is sent to help Arthur on the coastal beach and is told to take only 5 trucks at a time. But because Thomas does not like the smell of fish, he wants to get the job over and done with. Yeah, I don't get why this has been given the same title as a season 4 episodes. Again, if you're looking at this, it's a completely separate timeline, and they're trying to distance themselves from the classic era of Thomas and Friends as much as they can. This is a prime example of we are standing on our own. This is its own story. Yes, it might have the same title, but here's our one that you can watch. And while it's nowhere near as strong as the season 4 episode of the same name, there are things that I like about this episode. For starters, Arthur and Salty are both in it. They're 2 of my favourite characters. I really like Arthur. I like the fact that we're getting reintroduced to him in the fishing village. I just wish there was more of it. And an episode with Salty in it is always a good episode for me. I also like the crash into the fish truck. I thought that was done really well. Well, it doesn't hold a patch on the season 4 episode of the same name, I would say it's a good successor. Number 13, Thomas and the Circus. Written by Abby Grant, Thomas is told to take the circus train and to share the load with Percy and James due to its weight. Thomas wants all the glory, so he tries to pull the circus train all by himself. In terms of character, that's such a Thomas thing to do. It's something that makes it seem like there were still traces of the old Thomas and Friends in there. You could picture a season 1 Thomas trying to do that, or even a season 2 Thomas, where he thinks that he can do it all and then it turns out he just can't. And I wonder if this episode was the catalyst for James being bumped up to this trifecta of main focal point engines. You know, the Thomas, Percy and James thing that just seems to be prevalent from this era onwards in marketing and merchandise. The Salty cameo is good. There's lots of unique human props on display. The music for the circus by Robert Hartshorn is done very well. And in general, I think this story is really good. Number 12, Chickens to School. Written by Paul Larson, a lack of sleep gets the better of Thomas as he muddles up his jobs, so he needs help from Edward and Percy. A lot of people don't like this episode. I can understand that. We're all entitled to our own opinions. But I personally really like this one. I think because I relate to it with the whole, you don't get enough sleep, you're going to, quite frankly, arse everything up. It takes me back to when my sons were babies and I was riding on maybe 4 or 3 hours sleep and trying to go to my day job at the time and just completely destroying everything. And Edward's snarky line about always pushing Gordon up the hill, it does give me a really good chuckle. It's when I still thought, yes, there's parts of Edward still in there. The Edward that we know, the Edward that we love. But it was a proper burn moment from Edward on Gordon, and I really liked that. People in the fandom talk about how there are episodes in this franchise where they just embrace the silliness and embrace the fun. I think Chickens to School is my silly, harmless fun episode. Number 11, James Gets a New Coat. Written by Abby Grant, after James gets repainted, he is too busy showing off to do his job. He soon gets covered in coal on his way to Brendam Docks, with the hopes of being seen. When you watch my James is a ball bag video, a lot of the personality traits for James are definitely on show in this episode. It's why so many people love the character of James. His boastful, cocky nature, it just appeals to people. And you definitely see that in abundance in this episode. It does make me think James has a bit of a god complex. You know, he's strutting about like a peacock, wants everybody to admire him and look at how great he is. But in doing so, he doesn't do his work and it comes back and bites him in the tender. I think if you wanted to boil all of James's traits into one singular viewing experience, this is probably one of the best episodes to go and watch to get a true idea of what James is like. You know, go through the classic eras first, but this is where we started to see what the true James was going forward. It's a good episode. Number 10, Thomas and the Tuba. Written by Dave Ingham, Thomas is so excited to collect the brass band and take them to the park for Lady Hat's birthday that he leaves the tuba player behind. I've mentioned this previously when I did my top 10 best of video. I really think this should have been an episode where Edward was involved and not Thomas. Edward's already had previous with the brass band in season 7. It would have been a nice bit of continuity. But then again, if you're trying to establish this as a separate timeline, yes, I get the point. But this is a common trait with engines on this island of leaving passengers behind. I mean, season 1, Thomas left the guard behind. Season 4, Peter Sam left the refreshment lady behind. In this episode, Thomas leaves the tuba player behind. Makes you wonder, how many people do they leave behind on Sodor on a daily basis? The episode's pretty solid. I enjoy it for what it is. It made me smile. Number 9, Edward the Great. Written by Abby Grant, Edward has a race with Spencer to the Duke and Duchess of Boxford's summer house. Right, point I don't like about this, old frail Edward. You watch the classic series back, and when, at any point in the classic era, did Edward see himself as frail, weak, pathetic, any of the traits that they all of a sudden try to ram home in not only this episode, but this era of Thomas and Friends? Why did they make this change? Why did Abby Grant, when she was writing the Writer's Bible, think that this was Edward? She worked on Thomas and Friends for 2 years before this. I know that this is the tortoise and the hare. You know it instantly when you watch the episode. You know the story beats that it is going to hit. But having Spencer as the arrogant jackass in this is just fantastic. I loved seeing Spencer in this episode because you knew at the end he was gonna get his butt handed to him, and he did. But I do like that when Gordon sees Edward trying to do this race, at first he thinks he's an embarrassment to the railway. But then when he sees how hard Edward's trying, his attitude changes and he shows more support for Edward. Just wish that those type of attitudes would stick in these seasons of Thomas and Friends rather than them being for brief moments and then it's like you all of a sudden have an amnesia and you forget everything about it aside from the fact that, oh, Edward's old and frail. We don't like him anymore. Actually, that probably sums up how the writers probably felt about Edward. I think we need to really look at the title of this episode and remember what it was meant to imply. Edward is great. He's a great character in this franchise. He's a character that everybody loves when they read the Railway series books and when they watch the classic era of Thomas and Friends. He was the first engine introduced. It's why we got so affronted when they treated him like this, because he holds such a special place in the hearts of the fandom. While this isn't the biggest character assassination of Edward in this era of the franchise, it does upset you. But the episode itself is really strong. I did shout, get it right up ye when Spencer got beat. Number 8, Thomas to the rescue. Written by Abby Grant and Paul Larson, Diesel gives Thomas a hard time at the quarry but regrets what he said after taking on a batch of bad fuel. This is an episode that I have seen a lot. When I first watched it, wasn't really the biggest fan. I thought it was just a Thomas-centric episode where he has to prove his worth and that's about the gist of it. But the more I watched it, the more I enjoyed it. I think that's why people like the hit era more with repeat viewings. They find more in it because it's essentially you're trying to find the gold in amongst all the, quite frankly, poo. And this one is quite a golden episode. Not only because it has characters like Diesel, Mavis, Ari and Bert, and Salty in it, but you also see Thomas rise to this challenge. He's getting constantly put down by Diesel, being told that he's a smelly steamy, that the Fat Controller is going to end up scrapping them all. And there's some dark imagery in it, especially when Thomas starts to think about if Diesel's right and the Fat Controller is going to scrap them. We just see his imaginings of a desolate scrapyard where they're all dead. Pretty dark for this era of Thomas and Friends. I like the scene where Diesel got the new fuel, where he's starting to show off, and then all of a sudden he just completely craps out, and just that thick black smoke starts to rise from him, and you see all the faces start to change colour because they're like, oh, I'm gonna spew. And it's down to Thomas, the only steam engine who can get all this fuel for some reason, because there's no other steam engines that can do it out of the plethora of steam engines that there are on the island of Sodor. But he goes, gets all the clean fuel, they're able to get sorted, and they all have more of a respect for Thomas. Diesel doesn't say it, but you can see it on his face that he does realise he made a bit of a cock up on that one. I like the Thomas and Diesel dynamic in the episode. I really like Diesel's incidental music in this because it's more sinister than in the classic era, and it still gives me a little chill up my spine. Number 7, Spick and Span. Written by Mark Seal, Thomas and Percy try to beat Gordon, Emily and James in a cleanliness competition when the railway inspector comes for a visit. And boy, do they absolutely pump them. This is a classic tale of the little engines getting one over on the big engines. It's a winning formula. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's a new Three Stooges type of dynamic that is present in this season, and it revolves around Gordon, Emily and James. She seems to take Henry's place from that original Three Stooges, and she fits in quite well, ironically because of the negative personality traits that I didn't like when I first watched season 8. And overall I would say this episode is very enjoyable. Number 6, James Goes Too Far. Written by James Mason, James refuses to help his friends when given an important job, but he learns his lesson after running out of water. They essentially managed to cram James's 3-episode arc from season 1 into one episode. He starts off as an ass, he gets absolutely roasted by Salty, and then tries to make amends, even helping Diesel. And Salty tearing James a new one, I like that side of Salty. I love when Salty's very happy-go-lucky and chipper, but it makes it so much better when Salty flips that switch to, right, stop being a dumbass. And especially this dynamic he had with James, a character who is the utmost in Bob Aggery, and Salty's able to knock him down a peg or two. It's something I would have liked to have seen more. A good episode to show your kids as well if you're trying to teach them a good moral without it necessarily being rammed down their throats. Number 5, Halloween. Written by Dave Ingham, Emily accidentally scares herself as well as Thomas, Ari and Bert at the smelter's yard on Halloween night. The Halloween episodes, or the spooky episodes of Thomas and Friends, especially in the classic era, were a standout in the franchise. They were ones that gave you goosebumps, they gave you chills, they made you frightened. This is not to the par of the classic era episodes, but it is damn close. What really sells this for me is the music by Robert Hartshorn. It's amazing. The more I listen to the score on repeat viewings, the more I enjoy the incidental music that is used in this episode. It really adds to it. This episode kind of shows how far Thomas and Emily have come in this season as well. You'll get their dynamic in Thomas, Emily, and the Snowplow, and you compare it to Halloween, it's almost a complete 180. Ari and Bert being the ones that are originally planning to scare the crap out of these two and then in turn getting the crap scared out of them is pretty hilarious. The scenes at the smelter's yard are genuinely creepy. The story is really strong, and I know that I ripped into the fact that there's a CGI ghost at the end of the episode, but if it's for kids, you can let it pass. Number 4, Emily's New Route. Written by James Mason, Emily is scared of a monster in Black Lock, but finds out that the monster turns out to be a family of seals. This is another good Emily-centric episode because it develops her character. It shows that there is a vulnerability to Emily. When she hears about this monster of Black Lock, it does creep her out. It shows that despite her hoity-toity, nothing gets to me image, there is a fear in there. But it also shows that she's really brave, because when she has to do the Black Lock run, she could easily just stop, say she's not doing it, stay where she is. But she does it for the passengers. She knows she can't let them down. I didn't like the fact that she was able to shake on her own. It was kind of blubby for me. But the music used in this, once again, was on point. The music added to the dread, and added to the suspense and the fear. The crash with the trucks was also really good. And the scenery at the end, where Emily is watching the family of seals with Thomas, was very well done. Standout episode of Season 8 if you're going to watch. Number 3, Percy's New Whistle. Written by James Mason, Percy keeps blasting his whistle, not realising he is causing trouble for his friends. I've talked about the music a couple of times in the last entries, and one thing that I did notice is that Robert Hartshorn gave all the engines new incidental music. I don't know why. Maybe it had something to do with that dispute with Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell. And while I'll always prefer the originals, I don't mind Robert Hartshorn's work, and I particularly like Percy's incidental music. People don't like Percy's New Whistle as an episode. They think it's emphasising the fact that Percy is a baby character. But I think this is one of the strongest episodes of Percy's character. The other episodes that are lower down on this list that have Percy in them, they to me seem more babyish. I think this is more reminiscent of Percy's classic era character, where he was in season 1 and season 2. Cheeky, playful, bit of a prick, because he's loving the fact that this new whistle is scaring the holy hell out of steamies and diesels alike, and he's running with it. The episode itself is really enjoyable to me. I like the winter settings, I like the character arc that Percy goes through in this episode. I think having this as the second episode behind Thomas and the firework display were two great episodes to start this season and really introduce you back into the world of Sodor and remind you that while more things have changed, the more that some of them stayed the same. Number 2, Gordon Takes Charge. Written by Paul Larson, Percy has not taken passengers in a very long time, so during the Christmas season, Gordon teaches the small green engine how to treat coaches, but ends up showing off. I love this episode. I think Gordon and Percy have a fantastic dynamic in this. Very reminiscent of their season one classic era dynamic in Percy Runs Away. As a matter of fact, I think this could be a part two to Percy Runs Away. Gordon's trying to teach Percy the right way to do something, but in turn he is making a real balls up of it and making Percy feel frustrated. Instead of Gordon giving Percy positive reinforcement, he's essentially saying, don't do that, do this, because I'm awesome. This is how I do it. I think that people in the workforce, especially when you're going into a management or team leader role, need to watch this episode and take a serious amount of notes, because they would see a lot of themselves in how Gordon is acting. Instead of reinforcing the positives that Percy's doing, he's just picking out the negatives and making him feel worse, which makes the resolution of the story even more enjoyable. It's a great episode that emphasises the points around the right way to manage and teach someone. It's not about what you say when you pass on that information, but the way that you say it. A great episode, very well done. And the number one episode of Thomas and Friends, Season 8, is Squeak, Rattle and Roll. Written by Mark Seal, Gordon tries to hide his squeaking, rattling, and knocking after Diesel tells him he is going to be scrapped soon. I read so much into this episode. I think a lot of people have read a lot into this episode because everybody takes away something different from it. In my case, I take away the fact that it's giving you a good lesson about your mortality, that the rigors of time catch up to everybody. And if you're going to go out, you might as well go out in a blaze of glory rather than a whimper. This is what Gordon is trying to do. At first, he's trying to carry on and not let anybody know that he has these little niggles and problems. But when it starts to affect his performance and the thing that he loves doing, which is pulling the express, he decides, if this is going to be my last run, I am going to go out in style. We get the happy ending, realizing that, of course, the Fat Controller was never going to get rid of Gordon because he's Gordon. But for anybody new to the franchise, they would have that nagging doubt. I always say the best episodes of Thomas and Friends are the ones that you can relate to no matter what age you are. This is an episode that does that. The real world implications of this episode, in terms of your mortality and scrapping, really sell this episode for me. And that's why Squeak, Rattle and Roll is the best episode of Season 8 of Thomas and Friends by a landslide. And that, everybody, is my ranking of Thomas and Friends Season 8. Let me know in the comments how you would rank this season. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep on chugging.